All right, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me today. This webinar is about 401k investments and whether or not you need to look at them, change them. A lot of people take a set it and forget it type approach. Does that really work? And this is only given in the context of when you're in a plan with an employer. It's not in the context of rolling that amount over into a self-directed IRA. So first, just some questions that you want to consider. Like I said, and when I use 401k, if you're in a 403b, it's really not that different for purposes of this presentation, but I'm just using 401k because that's the more common term. First of all, can I set and forget my 401k or 403b investments? The new year brings a desire to make resolution. It leads to thoughts of change. When it comes to finances, that's usually a good time to review your holdings. So we want to include our 401k as part of that review. So other questions to consider besides whether or not I want to just look at how I've invested it is, how much did you contribute to your 401k? Can we see an example of what you're talking about? I'm going to go work my way through an example to show you kind of like the thought process and some things that you can look at. Also, just understanding how much risk are you really taking and what allocation makes sense for me. When you get to the point where you stop working and you want to consider rolling over, then there's other things that you want to take into consideration, like what are my choices? Because if you roll it into an IRA that's a self-directed account or a managed account by an advisor, there's a lot more choices. Also, the expenses can have a big role, and when you're working for somebody, you can't avoid those, but when you stop, you can. So when we think about set it and forget it, there's a number of questions that I post here. Are all these things constant, or do they change over time? Your goals, and when you start with a financial plan, we discuss goals, but those goals aren't static. They change over time as your life changes and your priorities may change. What's your time horizon? When your time horizon is really long, you can be much more aggressive. As your time horizon gets shorter, you're going to get more conservative. How's your health? That matters. Have you made any changes to your income and or your spending? If you look at what you're invested in and it's some type of mutual fund, has the manager of that fund changed? And has their goal and objectives of the fund changed? And what's your risk tolerance? How much did you contribute to your 401k? It's hard for me to imagine very many, if any, cases where you shouldn't invest at least enough to get the match. You always want to be able to do that because that's free income. Think about it. When you work for somebody and they give you a match, their assumption is that everybody in that plan is going to participate. So if you don't, you're giving away some of your income. And then the other thing is, it's really like a guaranteed return. The most common situation is when you have like a 6% contribution and you get a 3% match. So that means you're basically getting 50% on the amount that you put into your 401k. You can't top that kind of return anywhere. If you don't participate, you don't get that 50% benefit. You also want to think about, though, paying yourself first. That's really important. So that just means set up your deductions into your savings accounts. Make them automatic. Let it happen for you so you don't have to think about it. In terms of how much should we contribute, you want to, what does your financial plan suggest? Because that can give you some goals in terms of that you're trying to meet and help you figure out how much you want to put away on a regular basis. And what other savings options do you have? And that last one is really important because you want to have diversification of account types. That really matters when you start taking withdrawals in particular. And when I talk about account types, the main ones that I think about from a tax perspective and a financial perspective, in many ways, I think a health savings account, if you're in a high deductible healthcare plan, that's your best option of all. It's triple tax free. Money that goes into the account, and you get you don't pay tax on the money that goes into the account. You can invest your money in an HSA and you don't pay tax on that growth. And then as long as you've had some type of qualified medical expenses during the time that you have that HSA, you can also withdraw that money tax-free. You also want to think about a Roth. and a 401k or IRA. The primary difference being between the Roth and 401k, for those that don't know, is that in a Roth, your contributions into the account are tax-free, are after tax, but you get tax-free growth and you can pull the money out tax-free. In a 401k, you get a tax break for the money that goes into the account. You get tax-free growth, but then you pay tax when you do pull the money out of the account. And that can make a difference. And there's times during your life that it may make sense to convert money from a 401k or an IRA to a Roth. And then you might also have taxable savings. And all of those have different, when you're taking money out of the account, how those are taxed can all be different, and that matters because you want to try to manage your tax bill. So here's an example. This is a client that came to me. He works for a company that has their 401k at Fidelity. When he came to me, his allocation was a little over 80% in stocks and a little less than 20% in bonds, but that was through two life cycle funds two Fidelity life cycle funds. When I looked at his investment choices and we looked at his financial plan, he had really two options. First of all, when we looked at his risk tolerance, 80-20 for his stage in life, and his plan was more aggressive than he wanted or needed to be. So we targeted 70-30. So the proposed portfolio here would be looking at the funds within the plan and picking those that could get him to that 70-30, but having diversification. You'll see that there's a couple different, there's US and non-US bonds. There's S&P 500 index. There's exposure to mid-cap and small-cap stocks, global non-US stocks, and emerging market stocks. It's just to get broad exposure to the whole market. And let's look at what that does to, let's first talk about risk, because that's part of this decision that he wanted to go from 80-20 to 70-30. So there's two ways that I can define risk. One can be price fluctuation. How much does the price change on a daily basis? The other one, which is the one that I really prefer, is loss of capital. What's the risk that you have a permanent loss of capital? And that becomes most relevant when you retire. Why? Because you're no longer accumulating assets or adding money to your accounts. Now you start to withdraw. And when you're withdrawing, that means you have less opportunity to take advantage when the market goes down. Because really, when you're adding money to the market, I can make a good argument that the best thing that can happen for you is the market's falling. When you retire, it's different, but when you're adding money to the market, a falling market can be your friend because it allows you to take the same investment and get more of it, more shares. So if we look, here's from some software that I use. This kind of tells you the portfolio that you have. So this is the portfolio that the client came to me with, and how that portfolio performed during different periods of market dislocation in the past. So we have the long-term capital management Russia situation from 1998. We have the tech bubble from 2000. We have the World Trade Center attack. We have the subprime crisis. We have the debt ceiling crisis, and we have the coronavirus crisis. So you can see in the first three and the fifth of these scenarios, his portfolio basically fell just about as much as the market did. So it really didn't reduce his risk that much. In the other two, he did have a little bit less movement than the market, less decline. So the alternative portfolio that I showed you before, you can see here that in every one of these scenarios, that balanced portfolio that had the 10 funds, it declined a lot less during those times when the market fell a lot. And why does that matter? Because think about it, our behavior and our emotions can get in our way when we invest. And what I mean by that is fear and greed. Those are probably the two biggest emotions. Fear can lead us to sell at market bottoms, and greed can lead to us buying at market tops or when there's frenzies. And we really don't want to do anything in either one of those times. We want to be able to stick to our knitting and have a plan and stick to it. And so if we can reduce the amount of volatility and this movement in these bad markets, it can increase the likelihood that we're not going to change our portfolio. The second alternative portfolio, which is also a viable option, would be to just reallocate to the target date funds that the client was already invested in. And you can see again, for the first 3 periods, it didn't make much difference. It did make more of a difference in the latter, with the subprime. So the ones that within the last 10 to 15 years, it made more of a difference for the subprime and the debt ceiling crisis and the coronavirus crisis. The only time that this portfolio had a smaller drawdown than the other alternative was, I think it was the debt ceiling crisis. Yeah, it was the debt ceiling crisis. Nope, it wasn't. I'm sorry. It was in coronavirus. It was slightly less. It was 23 versus 25. And so here you can just see, I kind of summed them up. I know it's the numbers, but you can see the middle one is the one with the 10. And you can see that that one didn't react as much during those market dislocations. There's some other differences too, and we'll see those in a minute between those portfolios. You can see here's the allocation. So we ended up just less than 70%. Now, the only time that the middle one outperformed on an annual basis was over the really long, that 20-year period. The second alternative outperformed during the others, but again, it had more volatility. So you have to think about which one you're more comfortable with. You also see that the alternative portfolio, the middle one, had the lowest fund expenses, and it also provided a higher yield. Remember that first alternative portfolio held 10 mutual funds that had specific allocations to US and international bonds, the S&P 500, as well as small and mid cap and non-US and emerging markets shares. And part of the reason I always recommend, or at least want people to consider something like that, is you have more control over your allocation when you when you pick what you're investing in. And when you have a target date fund, over time, it's meant to increase the bond allocation and decrease the stock allocation. So you have a little bit more control on your own part if you choose one where you allocate specifically to those asset classes yourself instead of letting the manager of the target date fund take care of that. So let's talk about, sorry, I think I was looking, I have a different slide. I apologize. I'm going to leave this for a second. You can see here, this is what changed. You can see here's where the expenses, they fell pretty significantly, 45 to 50 basis points. The portfolio yield was also about a little more than 0.5% higher. And you can see here where the 20-year annualized performance was the best for the multi-fund portfolio. So let's talk a little bit more about risk tolerance. Risk tolerance is specific to you. The idea is to try to set it at a level where you won't sell out of fear or buy out of greed. If you're comfortable with your level of risk, you should be able to sleep well at night. So the primary things that you want to consider are what's your ability to assume risk and your willingness to assume risk. You want to make sure you find the right mix between those, because you may have you might have ability to assume it, but and that's in terms of your plan. But if you don't have a willingness, you want to find the right level of risk that you're comfortable with. Your time horizon matters. The longer your time horizon, the more risk you can generally take. And that's because when we look at the performance of stocks over long periods, the longer that period we look at, the more likelihood there is that stocks are going to do well. How have you reacted in the past when the market had those dislocations? Like, what did you do in March? How did you react then? If you were investing back in 2008 and 2009, how did you react then? Also, what's the stability of your income? Do you have an emergency fund and things like that? Those all factor in when trying to determine what the appropriate level of risk is for you. And risk tolerance. So this is the process that I use when I'm working with a client. And you can see when we start to build a financial plan, that's the middle level of this, this graph. One of the boxes says, what level of risk am I willing to accept? We want to understand what the risk tolerance. So that's an element of the financial plan. Risk tolerance is an important element of the financial plan. And why is it that we want to put a financial plan together? Well, remember, it's not about, the media makes a lot about beating the market, but that's really not what you should be focused on. You want to focus on positioning yourself to live the life that you desire. That's what matters. And that's how your financial plan should be set up, to help you live the life you desire. Like I spoke to somebody earlier today, and she said her biggest concern is that she wants to continue to live the way that she's living, and she doesn't want to run out of money. So we have to find a way to help her do the things that she wants to do without running out of money. When we plan, that should increase your comfort about what your future looks like and help you worry less about those short-term market fluctuations, because you should remain focused on the long term. If you're confident that your plan is going to get you there, those short-term fluctuations don't matter nearly as much. Like I said, then that plan can really help you focus on the long term, and it can improve your quality of life. And why is that? Because if you have to worry about these things less, then you don't have to spend as much time on them, and that leaves you more time to do the things that you like. I also refer to like this whole process, like when you're taking care of your finances, there's 3 things that you need. And the acronym is KIT. You have to have the knowledge, the interest, and the time. And that's why it can often make sense to have somebody help, because it'll free up your time. You might have the knowledge and the interest, but you don't have enough time to do it, pay proper attention to it, or you might not have interest in it, or you might not have the knowledge. Any one of those can apply. But if you can get yourself to where you have a plan and you're confident that it can get you where you want to go, I definitely think it can improve your quality of life. I mean, that's something that when I talk to clients about what the benefits are that they get from putting a plan together, that's a big one. Or just having the confidence that you can do things. I exchanged emails with a client the other day that we had done a plan, and they bought a house, and they bought that house. Why? Because after doing the plan, they were more confident that they could do what they wanted to do. And so it was time for them to be able to buy that house. So that's it for the formal presentation. I'll get to Q&A in a second, but before I do that, just want to remind people that while Prize's business is growing, we're always looking to add new clients. So we're looking for a few new friends. And one of the ways that we love to grow is through personal introduction from people that we know and take care of. So when you think about who you could introduce to a prize, here are some things to look for. We like people interested in gaining a better understanding of when they can retire and what retirement might look like. Oftentimes they're experiencing some type of life transition, such as retirement, loss of a spouse or parent, divorce, sale of a business, major career changes or inheritance. We really like to work with friendly people that are easy to get along with, and like not just having working with professionals, but also just like developing relationships with those that they work with that are personal as well as professional. Most of our clients are concerned about income taxes. I am a CPA, and so taxes are an important part of what I do. And they're considering simplifying their life by delegating their financial affairs to a professional. If you know anybody that might like an introduction, you can give me a call or send me an email. I also invite anybody that's attending today to sign up for a free portfolio review. You can use the link to my calendar there to do so. You can set up a 15 or 30-minute meeting, and that can be Zoom or by phone call. And portfolio reviews are an important element used when determining the appropriate steps for each client that are included in the financial planning and investment management process. And those graphs that I showed you, that's from one of the key software tool that I use to help do a portfolio review. And that's it for the formal presentation. I'm open to any questions, including if anybody wants to ask about what's been going on with GameStop. Right? Are there no questions today? All right, then, if there are no questions, I don't want to keep anybody unnecessarily, so I'll give it another minute, and then I will end the presentation for today. And I want to thank everybody for joining me, and I'll be back again in 2 weeks. So I believe that would be February the 11th, and I will send out information about the next webinar starting with the Friday before it happens. You're welcome, Owen. I'm glad you could join. All right, thanks everybody. Since there's no questions, I'm going to let you go. Have a great day.